Hello, everyone. This is Maya, your host, and today I have a guest that is actually coming for a second time on Trials with Maya Z. But there is a reason for that, a reason that makes me very passionate in the past couple of months. I decided to start a mini series on standard of care, why standard of care is important for clinical research and any decision making around clinical research, life sciences, and so on and so forth, and why we're starting with Carole. Carole is a passionate patient advocate, a patient herself, someone that is not only passionate about the thing that she's doing, but she's not only speaking, she's actually doing stuff. She started the organization Flutters and Stutters. I'll send you the link to that so that you can also follow. Carole is on every conversation with pharmaceutical companies, with patient advocacy groups to raise awareness and actually bring practical advice how we can make research and pharma more practical, more helpful, more efficient. And that's why Carole. And Carole and I, we had this conversation in the past about why it's critical for the researchers to understand the patient journey before they start even thinking of clinical trials. And standard of care, I want to start with how do I understand standard of care, and I'm happy to hear what Carole will say. But to me, standard of care defines the local patient journey to a big extent. Of course, the patient journey is defined by multiple criteria like the socioeconomical status, the demographic profile of the patients, like the country itself, and so on and so forth. But these are a lot of things that are being considered when also defining the standard of care of any indication in any country out there. What is basically accessible? What treatments, what procedures are accessible? What are the timelines, the waiting timelines, the information flow, and so on and so forth. Everything's basically defined by the local standard of care, and this standard of care defines more or less the experience of patients throughout healthcare. And the conversation with Carole today is about how the standard of care experience differs to clinical trial experience, and why we should even consider understanding better standard of care before making any decisions on how we should position, how we should plan our clinical trials. So, Carole, starting first with my first question, how do you understand standard of care from a patient perspective?
From a
How would you
patient
define it?
perspective,
Yeah,
how
how
do
would
I
you define
define
standard of
it?
care?
A standard of care is it's about access, but it's not just about access to a treatment. It's about
Mm,
how that access happens. It's about who's involved with that access, how long that access takes. I mean, sometimes outside the clinical trial space, standard of care, access to medicines, even just simple basic medicines, isn't easy. So when you're taking that into consideration and then looking at clinical trial space and the potential of having access to a drug via a different means, it might be better to take that route than to continuously not get access to that basic drug that's available all the time. But it is a lot about how you're treated. It's you are treated as an individual during that journey. How people it isn't what they see you as. You are not just a disease or even a person. That drives me mad when people go, "Hey, I'm a person. I'm not a patient." It's a lot more complex than that.
mm,
It is, you're right about when you're taking social determinants of health into consideration. That is your standard of care because
yeah,
everything has to be involved with that. The delivery services of how you get that.
yeah,
Does a person have a network of people to care for them, whether they are outside or inside a trial? Because if they haven't got that network before a trial, and you expect them, and you just assume they've got a network, then they might end up dipping out of that trial as a result, or they might not take any notice of your trial. I mean, for me, I have no network as such of a continued state of people there to back me through something like that. I have people I can call on, but that's
mm,
not a care system. So you have to take this into consideration through trials as well. And a lot of people, when they talk about trials, they talk about caregivers, but not everybody has that. And it's not right to assume that they do. And also, not everybody going through the trial process is a child. I'm talking about people like myself who's an adult. And adults don't have the same lifestyles or home ground as a child that's going through a trial.
Yeah.
So it is a
And
very
every
different
single,
journey.
exactly, Carol. And I would assume, not all assume, but your assumptions, you're absolutely right. We shouldn't assume. It's more my experience that every single indication, every single disease defines also some characteristics of how you experience standard of care. How progressed your disease is another story. But let's go to a practical question, Carol, because I know you've been exactly in such a situation. Your doctor comes to you and suggests you, hey, Carol, there are two options here. That's the established treatment. That's what I would prescribe you according to standard of care. And there is a new clinical trial, a great opportunity for you. How would you behave in such a situation? How would you compare these both options?
Well, in my case, it was very different because it was a case of what's the one that's going to keep me alive. So
Okay.
so for me, and there was actually about four options, but there was only one, which was the clinical trial. But having been diagnosed with non-small cell lung cancer, carcinoma in the lymph nodes, and not being able to have surgery, I was very limited to the treatments that they could give me. Radiotherapy was the prime treatment, and I just opted for short dose chemotherapy to go alongside it, which boosts the effect of the radiotherapy. It's not the main treatment at all. It literally is like a third of a dose once a week for 6 weeks, and after that. Because I had the right biomarkers, they said I could have this immunotherapy treatment. And that's what we decided. But then I got a phone call from one of my oncologists to explain that because my sliding hiatus hernia, which
Mm,
was nothing to do with the cancer, was sliding into my chest. It was causing a problem, and there was a problem with respect to the radiotherapy, because the radiotherapy is a little bit targeted. They tattoo dots on you, so they aim it and everything. That they might end up causing damage to my esophagus, to my hiatus hernia. So they offered me a couple of options, and one of those options was to pretty much have that same process, but to have the immunotherapy treatment alongside at the same time as having the radiotherapy and the chemotherapy.
oh,
But
wow.
I had no idea whether or not I was getting the treatment or not.
Yeah.
So for me, it was a case of, do I go along with what we've already decided with a slightly reduced radiotherapy regimen because of the hiatus hernia, or
Yeah.
or do I go for the trial and go for the best? But I had no idea whether or not I was going to get the chance for this immunotherapy treatment if I had had a placebo. So for me, that decision, it was really quite wrenching on the brain. Because it is a matter of life. Lung cancer is not the best. No cancer is good,
Yeah.
but lung cancer is definitely not one to mess with. And because mine kind of began in the lymph nodes, it doesn't matter what size it was an automatic stage 3 cancer. So for me, it was really bad. But I opted to go for the original decision that we made. And I mean, I'm gutted because to
Yeah.
say no to a clinical trial goes against everything I believe in. But when you are in that situation, you cannot say for certainty what's going to happen, or what situation you were in at that time. And for
Mm,
me, I just couldn't make that decision. And I think, for other illnesses, in specific, I think that's always going to be the case. If it's a life and death situation, people are going to choose the route that's going to keep them alive most. if a trial is likely to give them reason for life, they're going to choose the trial because they
Mm.
likely don't have a treatment available that can help sustain them, whereas I had that option. So for me, I was lucky, but also I am gutted that I couldn't contribute to research. But
Yeah.
I valued my my life option more, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, in these circumstances, I think that every single person, like very few exceptions, will prioritize your life, your quality of life as well, because here, like you said, it's a matter of living or dying, and contributing to research is absolutely like amazing opportunity. But then again, having to choose between these two options, it's hard. It's very hard, and you're a true inspiration, Carol, a fighter and real example. Like I said, you walk the talk. You not only preach that, but you only teach and preach, but you actually do it. But I wonder, Carol, if let's say that if you had another alternative that is provided by already reimbursed options, established options, and you're still offered clinical trial, then how would you decide on, like, how would you decide whether you go after the clinical trial or you choose the more, let's say, approved and established treatment? What would be
I
the
think
details that you're going to consider?
that is basically where I'll be in 6 months' time.
Okay.
It is because the what happens next, because that is a conversation, obviously, I haven't had with my oncologist yet. But I know that when it comes, because cancers, it doesn't matter if the immunotherapy
Mm,
and the treatment, in my case, it has shrunk it, and in my case, things have been going good. But in 6 months' time, when the immunotherapy stops, you don't
mm,
know what's going to happen beyond that. But if I get, so it's different. So for me, it's a case of I'm more likely to probably go on and choose the trial in 6 months' time, in a year's time, than I was back in this November
yeah.
when treatment hadn't quite begun yet. And I think that going through treatments already and having a bit of experience with those treatments helps make that decision. It does for me. I'm not everybody, but for me, going through the care system and the approach that I've gone through with different hospitals and everything also helps. And if a clinical trial can provide me with that same standard of care that I have received from the hospitals who have been providing my treatment now, then yeah. But I would want to make sure that they had that in place, because
Mm,
the standard of care I have actually received through my treatment so far has been 100% beyond. So they would have to match that
mm,
for me to say yes, because I
mm.
live by myself.
Yeah,
So
that's very
I have
interesting,
to
Carol.
ensure all of those things are in place.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Carol. So let me ask you another question then. If you're offered the clinical trial, but you have to change your doctor, would you go for it?
Yeah,
Yeah, you will. Okay. So
without a shadow of a doubt. Yeah.
okay. So the doctor is not the most important thing, but what is the thing that you're there? You won't do a compromise because you mentioned that the clinical trial should match at least the care that you've got from the standard of care. So what are these elements that are absolutely must? Otherwise, you can't proceed with the clinical trial.
This might sound a bit pretentious,
Hmm.
but it's not. It's not
Okay.
pretentious and it's not meant to be. But for the first time in my life, and it shouldn't be this way, but having multiple chronic conditions and living with those for decades and going through what I did as a patient for those decades and being treated like it didn't exist, these didn't exist, everything it was all in cause because of trauma and mind over matter, all of these different kind of things. Getting cancer, the first time that everything has been taken into consideration at once. So my
Mm,
health has been looked at holistically for the
mm,
first time properly. and I'm 50. So you can imagine how long I've gone and then sitting down and sitting with friends and going, ironically, I'm now getting the healthcare I've been advocating for, for the last God
Yeah.
knows how long. But it's because I've got cancer. And that is not how it should be. And at
Mm,
the end of the day, when you go for a clinical trial or whatever illness you've got, or you're getting that level of holistic care should be there. It should be there to make sure and ensure that your other conditions are being nurtured as well, not just the one you're on the trial for. Because at the
mm,
end of the day, you can't discount those. Those conditions are also contributing to your health, the one that you're on the trial for. You can't ignore them. It's as simple as that. So if you are designing a trial, you must remember to actually acknowledge that. It's
mm.
important. Otherwise, you're missing a big chunk of that patient. There's no point. I mean, this
Yeah,
is what we are advocating for as patients. I'm not the only one who's advocating for it at the end of the day. If
yeah,
a person's condition comes along with, it's not even a case of fatigue. There's a whole host of things, skin conditions, migraines, a whole host of things that people, you can't ignore these things. You must remember that they might need a level of care to make sure that they can deal with those and the side effects that they might get from the trial as well. It's all got to be taken into consideration.
and that's exactly where this alignment with standard of care should come in to understand what people at different stages of their disease progression are going through, what type of specialists they're meeting, like what is the likelihood of them having other chronic diseases or other side effects, like you said, and knowing that. And the thing is, this differs very much country by country, because in some countries there is one pathway, in other countries there is another pathway. But you're absolutely right. And even if we speak about cancer, to be honest, we have a lot to do there to approach cancer more holistically. But that's a topic of another big. That's
It
another big
really
topic.
is.
That's another big topic, definitely. I wonder also, Carol, because we were discussing what motivates you to join the clinical trial and how you're comparing standard of care with the clinical trial, and which are these must-have things within the clinical trial, so that so that you can feel welcomed in the trial, so that it kind of like matches at least the minimum that you're getting from the standard of care. What about staying in the clinical trial, especially when we speak about longer clinical trials that take months and months and sometimes years to be completed? What would be the motivator there, to stay in a clinical trial? And I would add one caveat: what if a new treatment is being reimbursed for the same disease while you're in a clinical trial?
You do throw these challenging things into the mix, don't you, Maya?
Well, that's the
I mean,
reality.
I mean, to go to the, before you throw that in,
Yeah, okay.
that I don't want to sound like I'm repeating myself, and that's along with millions of other patients, but that whole feeling of being included and involved really does drive people. I mean, I know some people would like to get paid for their data, and some people want. I mean, for me, my data's helping to improve something that I'm happy, but give me a drug at the end of it. I want the drug. If the drug's going to help me control, at least give me the drug at the end of it. That's what, I want. But if there's a drug, like you said before, earlier on, really, about if there's a drug that's already gone through that and it's available, and do you want to stay on the trial? Well, that's competition, isn't it? I don't know how I would deal with that, actually. I mean, if I was already on a trial and a drug was approved before that trial finished, it would depend on the level of disease.
Hmm.
I think if some people were really desperate, they're likely to because I cannot speak for myself at this point, but for me, if people were at a real serious level of their disease, then they are possibly going to ditch the trial to try and get the one that's already approved and the one that's already been reimbursed.
Interesting.
I really do think it will depend on need and necessity from a health perspective. Because if you haven't got as much of a need, then you're not going to have as much of a desperation
Like
for the drug.
motivation. Yeah, interesting. So can we say that clinical trials for patients are yet another care option at the end of the day?
I think so. I think, I mean, like every area of healthcare, there's an abundance of things that need to be done to improve it. But I think that it is because I hate these cliches, but it's because there is no one size fits all for humans, people. We are all different. And I know, I said this, when we've spoken before, even people with the same disease are all different. They're not the same. So people's needs need to be collected properly right at the start. And I know I'm going to keep saying that. Actually, I'm not really bothered about repeating that. Because
Yeah.
if it to be as perfect as possible, then you have to do it succinctly with that person's needs. It doesn't matter how many people you've got on that trial. If you're not meeting those specific needs, then that person's not they're not going to be as interested in hanging around. Simple as that, really, isn't it? I mean, it's basic.
Well, it sounds simple, Carol, but we all know that like applying this rule is absolutely complicated.
I know.
Clinical trials in general are complex creatures, and customizing them for the sake of meeting the individual needs is very, very difficult. I wonder though if we can like find some balance, maybe not individual needs, but let's say group needs, or let's say even country specific needs, which is actually my next question. Carol, you're based out of the UK and you're very well familiar with your standard of care healthcare system. But I know that your organization is truly global and you're going to all sorts of events where you meet a lot of your patient advocate friends. Some of them fighting same challenges like you do, same disease like you do, same diseases like you do. Um, so, what's your observation? Is the standard of care between different countries much different? Do patients in the different countries go through completely different journeys? What's your observation?
Well, I think the answer is yes. It
Yes.
is different. And I apologise to everybody, but regulations and the way that things are very different.
Yeah.
I mean, even within Europe, they're different from one country to the next. So I mean, it's there's no one level standard for across the board for everywhere. Healthcare systems are different from one country to the next. And I think, as patients and as organizations within industry, we all know that. We all understand, and I think we're all starting to respect that now. I mean, we know that it is different. So you can't have one set of rules. I mean, if you did have one set of rules that the globe could use, it would be amazing. But whether or not that is possible to actually build, well, I'm not so sure whether it is, to be honest. But which is sad, because I think that there must be at least one set of rules that we can fit within all the guidelines of everywhere, like a standard. People talk about gold standards for this and gold standards for that, but when the systems differ so much, like they do with healthcare, you think that is why there is so much difficulty in order to be able to provide these frameworks. I mean, people are building frameworks now within industry, I think, to try and counterbalance all of this. But I don't think it's going to be possible to do it at a global capacity. Will it
Mm.
happen at a global capacity? I think
Yeah.
there's going to be a lot of there's got to be a lot of lobbying, to get regulations changed, and
It's not only like
I can't
regulation.
see that happening anytime
Yeah,
soon.
it's not just the regulations, Carol. It's how much different countries and populations can afford. At the end of
Yeah,
the day,
exactly.
that's basically the what lies in defining local standard of care. What can one nation afford when it comes to healthcare coverage? And this unification that you speak about, it's a dream. Maybe it's
Mm,
not, to be honest, because the ideal world we would all settle with one standard, but it's the best. But that's not that easy. And if we have one standard, but it's, let's say, ultimate, let's say it's not the best what's available, just so that everyone can afford. That
mm.
sounds a little bit like a communism type of in healthcare, and I don't think that anyone wants to achieve that. But anyway, I want to ask you for an advice. Imagine I'm planning a clinical trial, and I need to work on my protocol. I need to work on my eligibility criteria. I need to work on my schedule of visits and so on and so forth. What would be your advice to me to understand better what patients are going through, and how am I to take into consideration their standard of care? Like, do you have any advice for me?
Talk to the patient.
Talk to the patient. Thanks, Carol. Thank you very much, Carol. You again had like brought a lot of interesting perspective, also practical advice, practical insights. Talk to the patient maybe it's the least practical, because I know firsthand how much the industry is struggling with that. But let's hope that together we'll find better ways to empower more conversations between patients and industry. Thank you so much for your participation once again, Carol, and good luck with all you do.
Thank you very much for inviting me to join you again, Maya. It's fantastic as always. Thank